So we've previously looked at the Silk Roads, and as opposed to diving into another trade route at this point, we look at the main, and we can probably say most successful, at least in the short term, pastoral nomads in world history, the Mongols. And the Mongols directly interacted with and facilitated trade on the Silk Roads. That's why we look at them now. Now, in terms of the basics of Mongol life, there are two things we get a decent look at here. They're pastoral nomads from the Asian steppes, and Mongol history is rife with warfare and it really borders on feudal. They lived in small and widely scattered encampments that were made up of kinfolk, as opposed to large villages. Occasionally, they would organize into patrilineal clans and band together as a tribe to, include unrelated peoples. And they lived in felt tents such as this, known as yurts. They're very easy to set up, very easy to take down and move with them, because again, they are pastoral nomads. Now, they were the stereotypical barbarians to the north that the Chinese would complain about, they'd worry about, but then they'd trade with them. The Mongols spoke Mongolian and various Turkish languages. Now, in the year 1206, a Central Asian prisoner of war was asked to record something that the great Khan himself, Chinggis Khan, had spoken, and he spoke it in Mongolian. However, the prisoner wrote it in the script you see here, the Uyghur script, his native Uyghur script, and the language was spoken in Central Asia and Western China. After this, the Mongols actually adopted Uyghur as their written language. So this is going to, very early on, demonstrate their ability to trade and adapt different goods as well as ideas. Now, tactically speaking, obviously these individuals are known for combat. Their grassy homelands on the Asian steppes provided the Mongols with a seemingly unending supply of horses, and horses was one of their primary trade items. So, horses were really pretty much integrated into every part of their lives. Mongol children learned to ride at about age 3, and the Mongols always drove 3 to 4 extra horses with them, whether they were fighting or hunting. They would often put dummies on these horses, and it explains why enemies often inflated the number of men in Mongolian armies. Men are trained to count the number of horses. They assume 1 man per horse. So it kind of inflated how many men were truly fighting. They were known to be able to change horses without breaking a gallop. The Mongol arrow, we see the bow and the arrow, they were accurate up to 300 meters. The Mongols rarely engaged in hand-to-hand combat because their cavalry was so effective. Mongol women tended to hold higher status than, for sure, their Chinese neighbors to the south, but other places in the world at this time. Women were involved in productive labor, and they also took care of domestic responsibilities. They cared for smaller animals like sheep or goats. Remarriage of widows was acceptable, and women were allowed to initiate divorce. Since women had more power to run their households when men were away, which was incredibly frequent, women also served as political advisors and were active in military affairs. So we do see that this is a key difference between nomadic or pastoral societies from settled society. Women simply enjoyed more freedom, more status. What are they known for? Their military might. We can see here that this was the Mongol territory in 1206, when a man named Chinggis Khan is going to take power. Then he expanded, and his heirs continued to expand. Officially, his name is pronounced Temujin. He later would assume the title of Chinggis Khan. It's actually pronounced Chinggis Khan, which means universal ruler. His father was murdered by political rivals before he was 10 years old, and his family was then deserted by other members of his clan. Tough early life for this guy. To begin with, he was an extremely charismatic individual, and he began to forge alliances by depending on his trusted friends rather than bloodlines of his kinship group. His earlier experiences with kinship groups taught him that they can't always be trusted. He eventually worked his way into becoming a chief and was recognized as the supreme leader of the Mongol state in 1206. Now, why leave their lands in Mongolia? From a practical standpoint, they had overgrazed the land. They simply overgrazed it. And they needed grassland for their animals. The attraction of China's wealth was a huge incentive to look south. All right, so they knew that China had stuff that they wanted. They had a trading relationship. He looked south. However, this concept of needing something to do can't be overstated. Genghis Khan knew that if his new army sat for too long, they'd get restless and it would begin to fracture. It was to his advantage to continually wage war and keep his men occupied so that they would have something to do. They could earn the spoils of war and seek financial incentive to continue fighting. Now, in terms of how they did it, they were beneficiaries of good time. There were fewer than 1 million Mongols in the total population and few resources beyond their livestock. But luckily, the Chinese were fractured and ripe for the taking, and the Abbasid Caliphate, they were a fraction of their former state, so the nearby empires were really quite weakened. The structure of the army was reorganized into units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000 warriors. The tribes were specifically broken up and reshuffled into new units, so old divisions in society would not affect combat operations. Each soldier was supposed to espouse discipline and loyalty in combat. Genghis Khan himself earned the loyalty of his men by always fighting in the front lines and sharing in the hardships of his men. Now, the great Khan emphasized a meritocracy, an extreme meritocracy, where promotion is based on talent and ability, not lineage. And he allowed his generals to make their own decisions in campaigns. However, he did expect supreme loyalty from him. Now, with toleration, the Mongols had long considered religion to be a personal issue, and it's of no concern to the state. So they were extremely tolerant of the right to practice one's own religion. This is believed to derive from Genghis Khan's own past and his desire to put aside petty differences in favor of a common good. We even know that upon his impending death, he consulted a Taoist master, Taoism, a spiritual tradition of China. However, fear. Fear was their main weapon. When the Mongols showed up, you were finished, because you get an ultimatum. Surrender or be crushed. Surrender the city within the walls or be crushed. In the city of Kiev, the Mongolian envoys were actually beheaded, so they laid siege to it. 1 year later, all right, they laid siege to it 1 year later. Of the 50,000 inhabitants, 2,000 survived. 2,000 survived, and the city was burned to the ground, leaving them free to enter Central Europe. The vanguard of the Mongol army actually reached Vienna, which is in Austria, when they were called back to the homeland to elect a new Khan. At this point, Genghis Khan's successor and his third-born son Ogadai had died. So tradition stated that all leaders had to return to elect the new chief. So it spared Europe from Mongol fury. Chronicles report that 1.6 million were dead in Herat in Iran. And in Nishapur in Iran, 1.75 million were left dead. The Mongols heard that the king had hidden among the dead, so he ordered the heads cut off of all of the bodies. In all, 10 to 15 million in the Iranian plateau alone were killed due to Mongol conquest, and the population didn't recover until the mid-20th century. the middle of the 1900s is when the population of the Iranian plateau finally recovered from Mongol conquest.